I am Camilo Calderón. I am from Colombia. I'm from a small city called Cúcuta in the northern eastern border with Venezuela. I study bats. I have been studying mammals in general for the past 12 years, and I have focused on bats for the past 10 years. My research at UNSL has focused on understanding the evolutionary relationships of a group of nectarivorous bats. The nectarivorous bats are important because they pollinate a lot of different plants. But to understand their evolution and ultimately to know what conservation efforts should be made for each of the species, we need to understand clearly what is a species of this group of bats, what are the species that we have in this group of bats, and how can we determine and diagnose them, either in the field or in the museum. For that, I started visiting museums and looking at museum specimens, seeing how their morphology changed depending on their geography and depending on the species, and seeing if I could find differences that could allow me to understand the species limits of this group of bats. I also use genetics to try to understand the same process and see if it's only a few species of bats or if we have 10, like some people say now. And it turns out that it's less than 10 species. We have overestimated the diversity. The genetic analysis do tell us that we have overestimated the amount of species that we have in this group. They're actually in the lower range. There are actually 8 to 9 species in the group, and they're fairly cohesive regardless of their geographical range. We have samples of bats that are distributed from northern Colombia to southern Brazil that are cohesively the same species and that are all related to each other more closely than other species that are also distributed in the Andes only, for example. So the genetics did a great job in separating them and in giving us an understanding of their evolution. We found that this group has evolved in the last 9 to 7 million years, with some species having their most recent common ancestor in the range of 700,000 to 1.8 million years, some of them. So that's fairly young, and that could explain why the morphology of these species is so conserved. They are really young species that are starting to diverge, and even though they are genetically different and they are consistently different and they're not hybridizing, their morphology still remains very similar throughout all of them.